Welcome back, my dear followers. This is a new episode of The History of the American Mafia, a podcast brought to you by Fabio Fabiano, read and translated by Grace Carlisi. I do hope you enjoy today's new episode. Today we're going to meet Anthony Strollo. According to FBI files, Anthony Strollo, also known as Tony Bender, was Vito Genovese's right-hand man. Strollo was one of the great protagonists of the history of the Mafia in New York City and New Jersey in the late 1940s and early 1960s. So pulled the strings in a lucrative drug trafficking and gambling operation for the Genovese crime family. Antonio Strollo was born on June 18, 1899, in New York to Italian parents, Leone Strollo and Giovannina Nigro. Originally from Calabria, in Italy, he spent his childhood in the area and the Manhattan Bridge. He was affiliated with the Masseria crime family since 1920s, with the onset of Prohibition. In those years, his reputation was that of a smuggler and an excellent killer, to the extent that he was suspected of around 30 murders. He became a loyal friend to Lucky Luciano in the mid-20s. In 1931, following the killing of Maranzano and the new reorganization of Cosa Nostra, he became the leader of Greenwich Village, under Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese. He was also given control of most of southern Manhattan, where he engaged in gambling and racketeering in part of New Jersey. One of his soldiers, a term used to identify subordinate members of the Mafia family, began to behave out of line. Michael Rigione was guilty of expanding his rackets too much to his detriment. To solve the problem, he turned to Luciano, asking for authorization to kill his rival. On November the 25th, 1932, two of his men, Peter Mione and Joe Valacchi, killed Rigione with 3 gunshots to his head. To a long prison sentence in 1936, Lucky Luciano appointed his deputy Vito Genovese as regent of the entire family. Strollo became the underboss to Genovese. Meanwhile, Genovese was forced to flee to Italy in 1937, accused of a murder that had occurred several years earlier. With Genovese gone, Frank Costello became boss, and his place was taken by Willie Moretti, a man loyal to Costello. Despite being closer to Genovese, Strollo also had a great relationship with Costello. In that period, he increasingly consolidated his power, and through his numerous frontmen, he successfully opened numerous trendy nightclubs in Greenwich Village, including the Black Cat and Hollywood 19. Vito Genovese, despite his long absence in Italy, was arrested, brought back to the United States to face the trial. Following the trial, he was acquitted of the murder of Ferdinand Boccia. Once free of charges, Vito aimed to return to being the boss of the Mafia family. In his attempt to regain power, he formed friendships and alliances among the soldiers and leaders closest to him, before his hasty escape to Italy. Genovese also contacted old allies he had had in other American Cosa Nostra families, in particular the members of the Napolitani, or the Napolitan faction of the Italian underworld. By the mid to late 1950s, he felt confident enough to take back power once and for all. He began plotting and planning to overthrow Frank Costello, ordering his loyal soldiers to carry out deadly tasks. Legend has it that Vito contacted 3 of his faithful associates from Greenwich Village, all Anthony Strollo's men, to carry out the murder. An up-and-coming young delinquent named Vincent Chin Gigante was chosen to be the shooter. Thomas Eboli, the driver, and Dominic Kalonji, designated as the post. Other members in a second car covered the trio involved in the murder from possible police intervention. On May 2, 1957, Gigante grazed Costello's head with a gunshot. After the ambush, Costello was convinced to immediately hand over the scepter of command in favor of his opponent, so as not to risk a bloody gang war. After Vito Genovese consolidated his power in the underworld as the new head of the family, Strollo's power and influence also increased. Once he was the official head of the new Genovese family, Vito appointed his longtime aide to the coveted position of underboss, essentially his second in command. After Vito Genovese was convicted in 1959 and imprisoned for 15 years for conspiracy and drug trafficking, Tony Strollo's power further increased exponentially. For all intents and purposes, Strollo became the top figure of the entire Genovese family and was Vito's eyes and ears. Strollo was joined as deputy chief by Jerry Catena and councillor Michele Miranda by Decina bosses Thomas Eboli and Philip Lombardo. After Genovese's arrest, Strollo became closer to Carlo Gambino and began distancing himself from Genovese and the rest of the management of his Mafia family. Strollo, who was engaged in drug trafficking, decided not to send Genovese a part of the proceeds coming from his illegal activities. This turned out to be a huge mistake. In fact, Genovese, from prison, ordered his murder. At approximately 10 p.m. on April 8, 1962, Strollo told his wife he had to go out. The woman later reported to the police that her husband, his home in Fort Lee, New Jersey, had gotten into a 1961 Cadillac with an associate unknown to her. Strollo was never seen or heard from again. His disappearance was attributed to the lupara bianca, a journalistic expression used to define mafia homicides involving the occultation of the corpse after the murder. His remains were never found.